Hi, welcome to Dated Disney and DC. This video is on the start of DC Comics and focuses on some important people, important characters, and one story of planned betrayal and plenty of drama. I hope you enjoy this video and thanks for checking out my channel in the making. The story of DC Comics starts with Malcolm Wheeler-Nicholson, who founded National Allied Publishing in 1934. In February 1935, National Allied Publications launched its first publication, which was New Fun, the Big Comic Magazine, Issue 1. New Fun was successful enough for the next project, New Comics #1, to be published in December 1936. The third series that National Allied Publishing released was Detective Comics, or DC. However, this was greatly delayed until March 1937. Debt would be the cause of this delay and also the cause of the first drama in the company's history. This leads into the first person of interest, Malcolm Wheeler-Nicholson. Part 1. Malcolm Wheeler-Nicholson. Malcolm Wheeler-Nicholson was born on January 7, 1890 in Greenville, Tennessee. During his life, he worked as an editor and a writer, but was known as the creator of NAP, National Allied Publications. Wheeler-Nicholson was born to Lola Orlando Strait and Antoinette Wheeler. When he was 3 years old, his father abandoned the family. Malcolm went to live with relatives in Buffalo, New York. Later, Malcolm's mother would move the family to Portland, where she met and married Nicholson's stepfather, thus changing his last name. As with many men from poor families at the time, Malcolm joined the U.S. Cavalry in 1912. However, in 1922, while stationed in France, Malcolm left the army following a confrontation with officials and a murder attempt charge. Following him leaving the army, Malcolm became a writer for pulp magazines, which were a big seller of the time, and would adapt some of his stories from the army into a comic strip form. It was in 1925 when Malcolm opened a newspaper syndicate, with one reason for it being to sell his comic strips to newspapers. Wheeler-Nicholson founded National Allied Publications in fall of 1934. He took a lot of inspiration from earlier comic magazines, including the famous Funnies. In January 1935 was when New Fun comics would come out. His magazine focused on new and original comic strips, which he had written himself. This was definitely a sign of passion that goes in the face of business strategies, but that might have been what led to his downfall. Due to financial problems, Wheeler-Nicholson had to take on a financial partner. The partner he chose was Harry Donenfeld. Donenfeld was a pulp magazine publisher and distributor. Once he partnered with Wheeler-Nicholson, this led to the publishing of Detective Comics, Incorporated. In 1937, Wheeler-Nicholson founded Detective Comics, Inc. and took on both Henry Donenfeld and Jack Leibowitz, Donenfeld's accountant, as partners. This was a condition from Donenfeld, who otherwise would not have funded the cost of the company. During the following months, Donenfeld and Leibowitz started to pressure Wheeler-Nicholson to leave the business side of the company to them, as they were more experienced and more financially successful. Wheeler-Nicholson refused. He felt that the business was his. However, after he refused, Donenfeld sued Detective Comics, Inc. for non-payment of debt, and the company was declared bankrupt. Even worse, this happened whilst Wheeler-Nicholson had gone on a trip to Cuba. Donenfeld and Leibowitz bought the company during the time of the bankruptcy at an auction for a very low cost and kicked Wheeler-Nicholson out of his own company. A few months later, Action Comics, famous for the Man of Steel, was printed. Part 2, Jack Leibowitz. Although some may think of Leibowitz as only a swarthy business associate, he did actually bring some good to the comics. Jack Leibowitz is known as the man who helped turn Superman into the most recognizable superhero in the world. After he and Donfeld bought the company, Leibowitz was able to push forwards with Detective Comics. The first issue of Detective Comics was published in March 1937 and has also been known as the first successful comic book series with a single theme. In May 1939, Batman made his first appearance in DC and has the longest run with DC Comics. He is also the best-selling of the DC lineup. As a contrast to Detective Comics, Leibowitz also started Action Comics, which was where Clark Kent appeared. Superman was created by Siegel and Shuster and may have only made it into the magazine at the time due to some deadline pressures. The first copy of Action Comics was published in 1938. Another publication which Leibowitz was a partner in was called All American Comics, and this is where you would see the start of The Flash, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, and others. However, stepping back from the passion, anger, disputes, and the lives of these great men, it is important to look at the work that was created by these men and many, many editors, writers, and artists. Part 3, New Fun Comics. There were 6 issues in the run of New Fun Comics, which ran from February 1935 to October 1935. This was the first appearance of the character Dr. Occult, whom I'm touch on later. New Fun Comics was seen as a tabloid-sized anthology comic magazine featuring all new content. This was unique since most magazines would feature only comic reprints. The genre of the magazine was a mix of comedy and adventure comic strips. Some of the characters that were featured were Texas Ranger Jack Woods, Secret Service Agent Sandra, a time-traveling pair of children Bobby and Binks, French Foreign Legionnaire Wing Brady, and the vagrant orphan Little Linda. The future Superman creators Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster debuted in the magazine's last issue with swashbuckler Henry Duval and ghost detective Dr. Occult. Part 4, More Fun Comics. More Fun Comics had a run from January 1936 to November 1947, in which they published 127 issues. Some of the characters here are the more well-known, including Aquaman, Green Arrow, and Superboy. Some interesting things that happened during the run of More Fun Comics are October 1935, Dr. Occult debuted in New Fun Comics number 6. He has had a longer run than that of any other DC character. February 1940, the Spectre made his appearance and 3 months later would be joined by Dr. Fate, with both of these characters going on to join the Justice Society of America. November 1941, Green Arrow and Aquaman both debuted. 1945, Superboy debuts. After the end of More Fun Comics, the characters' stories were either finished or they would be moved over into new comics. For instance, Green Arrow, Aquaman, and Superboy were moved to Adventure Comics following issue 108, which was also immediately after World War II. To make up for this move, More Fun Comics was redesigned as a humor magazine and introduced Genius Jones and Dover and Clover. It ended in 1947. No comic book is created all by itself, however, and these are some of the artists and writers who worked on the comics. You hopefully will be able to see more names on the screen right now. However, these are a few. Charles Flanders, who wrote Sandra of the Secret Service for National Allied Publications, drew The Lone Ranger from 1939 to 1971. Henry Cole Kiefer, began his career selling pulp magazines during the mid-1920s. Throughout the 1930s, he continued to illustrate for pulps. His work can be found in DC Comics, Fox Features, and Quality Comics. Ken Fitch was one of the most prolific writers of the Golden Age and created Owlman, Mr. America, and Don Drake. This is just to highlight some inspirational and incredible people who worked on these publications. However, as unfortunate as it might sound for people who spent hours drawing and laboring at their crafts, what people remember most about comics are the characters. Although we have to thank the artists, writers, and everyone from behind the scenes for these characters we love, it's the characters we remember, and the characters we have Funko Pops of and posters on our walls. And I hope that ages more like fine wine than old cheese. Part 5. The characters. The most established DC character from the very early years is Dr. Occult. These days, you might be able to find Dr. Occult in the run during the 1980s when he was revived and given a developed backstory by Roy Thomas. He was also used in the 1990s by Neil Gaiman for his Books of Magic miniseries. Dr. Occult is the beginning star of the DC Golden Era. The story of Dr. Occult, otherwise known as Dr. Richard Occult, begins with Richard and Rose, who were to be sacrificed by a satanic cult on New Year's Eve in 1899. However, instead of summoning the devil, they accidentally summoned a satanic entity named Koth before being rescued by an Eastern clandestine group called the Seven. The Seven named them Richard Occult and Rose Psychic and trained them in magic. In the 1920s, Richard has earned his doctorate and opened a private investigation firm in New York City, where the pair take on several cases involving vampires, magic, monsters, and all sorts of other mysterious dealings. Some of the powers that Dr. Occult has include astral projection, hypnosis, magic, and telekinesis. To find out more, I suggest either looking for his revival or the books that are about him from the Golden Age. This next character was the most exciting part of looking up the history of DC Comics for me, and that is the character Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, which, since this is dated Disney and DC, might sound a little familiar. Part 6. Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. Oswald the Lucky Rabbit was a 1927 creator of Ubi Airworks and Walt Disney's. However, when Disney left Universal Studios for his own company, Universal was allowed to keep hold of the rights of Oswald and assign him to other animation studios. Oswald was first transferred to the Winkler Studio and then to Walter Lantz Studio. Oswald's shorts were released between 1927 and 1943 from these companies. It wasn't until 2006 that Universal Studios traded the rights to Oswald back to Walt Disney Company. Oswald was licensed to DC in 1935 and he made his first appearance in New Fun Comics #1, but his series ended shortly in 1936. He was in 271 issues and demonstrated different powers and abilities such as invulnerability, swordsmanship, super strength, and healing. I would love to talk more about this cute rabbit, but since I consider his home to be with the Disney characters, I will do that in a future Disney-oriented video on this channel. So, that is the beginning to DC Comics. I actually learned a lot in making this video and have provided the links to the sources I used in the comments section. I would love to continue to learn more. If you made it this far into the video, I am truly thankful that you took a chance on me and hope you enjoyed it enough to come back in the future, where we check out another date for our dated Disney and DC. Thank you again.